Feeding a family on a tight budget while still prioritizing healthy homemade food isn't always easy, but it is possible. Over time, I found ways to make it work, cooking from scratch and stretching our grocery bill without sacrificing nutrition. In this video, I'm sharing 10 easy low-cost snacks that I prep in bulk to keep our grocery bill down. This isn't just about saving money, it's about making every dollar count because where we live, a single income barely covers the basics. In Prince Edward Island, the living wage is $22.76 per hour, but my partner makes quite a bit less than that, and I stay at home with our baby, so for us, frugal living isn't just a trend, it's a necessity. But instead of letting that define us, we built a lifestyle that works. I'll include timestamps below so you can skip to a specific recipe if you like, and since I like to prep ahead, I started by soaking my legumes and prepping my bread the night before. So let's get into it. So as you can see here, I'm soaking my black beans and chickpeas. For the chickpeas, I'll be using it for hummus, and for the black beans, I'm making black bean brownies, which are supreme and better than any other brownie in my opinion. It is so much cheaper to soak your beans than buy them in cans, and usually we have a can here or two, just in case we forget or something. But I would say 99.9% of the time we soak our own beans because you will save so much money that way, like so much. It's not even funny. So right now I am prepping the bread, and this is by far the cheapest bread recipe that I've ever found and have made. It's literally just a couple ingredients. You need 4 cups of whole wheat flour, 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt, 3/4 teaspoons of dry yeast, and then 1 to 2 cups of water. And all those ingredients are really cheap, especially when you buy it in bulk. Kai works at a food distributing center, so we get our flour at a pretty good price because we get it discounted. And then, yeast is probably the most expensive thing out of that. Salt is cheap and water is basically free, not for everyone, but it's relatively affordable if you do have to buy it. So I'm just mixing the dry ingredients and then mixing the water into it. Sometimes, depending on, the temperature outside or whatnot, I add a little more water, a little less, and that's the secret with making bread is you don't have to follow the exact recipe. It's more by feel. You want it still a little bit sticky, but not too sticky where the dough, like you can't even get it off your fingers. So right here, I'm just kneading it, and I started this the night before because with whole wheat flour, it does take quite a bit longer to rise than white flour, and because we do live in a cold climate and our house is old and the heating is not good, the insulation's not good, so it takes extra long for this to rise. So I usually let this rise for 12 to 18 hours, so that's why I do it the night before. I think I started this around maybe 5 p.m. and then I baked it in the morning around 9 or 10. When you start making it, it seems very intimidating, but it's actually super simple. The longest part is just letting it rise. And if you want these cute bowl covers that I'm putting on, I actually just made a tutorial on them with the help of my mom, so I'll link that down below. And I guess I should also mention before we get into any of the other recipes that these recipes aren't any of those ones you see on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, those fancy make your own Pop-Tarts and your own goldfish crackers and all those things, because I just don't have the time for that, and I don't know how others do either, honestly. And B, we try to keep things simple in our household, simple ingredients, healthy ingredients, and also the more simple and basic also means cheaper, and we don't have the money for anything fancy like that either. Some things you see, like the bread, you might think, oh, well, that's not really a snack, but for us it is. If we're hungry, a piece of bread with peanut butter, some healthy fats, that is a great snack to fill us up and very cost effective. But the secret people don't share about making everything from scratch is that you're constantly doing dishes, especially if you're like us and you don't have a lot of pots and pans and bowls. We reuse the same bowl basically for making everything. We have a couple glass ones, but this is the best because it's the biggest, so we're constantly using it, cleaning it, but at the end it actually works out because at the end of the day it's not like we have a big pile of dishes since we're constantly, or I am constantly doing them. So your bread, once the oven is preheated with the pan inside, you put your bread inside with the lid for 30 minutes and then you take the lid off after the 30 minutes and cook it for an additional 15 minutes. Take it out, let it cool, and it is ready. And as always, if you're interested in any of these recipes, I'll have them all linked down below. So next, I'm moving on to these no-bake granola bars that I make all the time because they're so easy, simple. Kai loves them, Makai loves them, I love them, so they're great for the whole family. All you need for this is basically oats and then something to keep it together. In today's recipe, I'm using 2 cups of rolled oats, 1.5 cups of peanut butter, 1 cup of ground flax seeds, and half a cup of honey, and just a sprinkle of chocolate chips. But you can customize this to your liking. I change it up every time. If you have nuts and cranberries, dried cranberries and things like that, you can add that into it, as long as you have the base, which is oats, and then something to keep it kind of sticking together, whether that be peanut butter, coconut oil, sweetener like honey or maple syrup. You can add less sweetener, more sweetener, so it's really easy and it can be made really cheap because oats are cheap and peanut butter is not too expensive. Like, it's not cheap, but it's not crazy expensive, and then you don't really need anything else, honestly. Everything else is extra. You can also add, if you want to bake it, bananas are a great sweetener. I like maple syrup, but we just had this honey that my mom gave us that is local that they weren't using, so that's why I used honey today. You just want to mix it all together and then push it into a greased baking sheet and then put that into the fridge or freezer to harden, and then take them out in a couple hours, cut them up, and they're good to go. You don't need to store them in the fridge or freezer, but I do just because it makes them last longer and makes them kind of stick together better. You can even make a bigger batch and freeze some of these, so you could double this recipe if wanted. Next, I was getting pots out to boil my chickpeas and my black beans so I can move on to my black bean brownies and my hummus. So I just rinsed them out. You can actually keep the water from the chickpeas. It's called aquafaba, and I like to use that in recipes as an egg replacement. But I don't always need it. Sometimes I'll freeze it in ice cubes, but then I'll end up with so much in my fridge. So I already had some stocked, so I didn't save it this time. So I was just filling my pots up with water to boil them. And a fun use to use with your leftover water from your black beans is you can actually use it as a dye. You'd want to let it sit more than just one night, maybe up to a week or so, and it becomes this beautiful purpley bluish gray color. And in the past, I've used it to dye pillowcases. It does smell a little bit, but you know, when you wash it out, it smells fine and you have this beautiful color. So if you like a video on that, let me know. Anyway, my bread was done, and as you can see here, it looks absolutely beautiful. And while I was waiting for my legumes to boil, because they do take longer when you soak them yourself, because obviously in a can they come pre-cooked, versus this, it takes I don't know exactly, maybe 20 to 30 minutes on the stovetop. If you had a pressure cooker or an Instant Pot, they would cook a lot quicker, but we don't have any of those fancy tools like that. So while I was waiting for those to cook, I started prepping my black bean brownies. This is not something I make all the time. If you go back to my Christmas baking video, I made these there, and they were a hit. I gave them to everybody, and everybody, like literally everybody, even the kids, my nephews and nieces, told me they were their favorite brownies they've ever had, and little did they know they were actually really healthy with black beans, which has iron and protein in it, which they all need. The oats also have iron and protein, and coconut oil, maple syrup, so they are a hit. So I don't make these as often, but it was my nephew's birthday coming up and Kai requested them, so this was the snack for the week, or shall I say a special snack for the week that we don't make all the time versus the other ones we make quite often. The great thing about this recipe is that it's pretty easy and uses a lot of the same measurements for each ingredient, so it's also easy to remember. I started off with melting half a cup of coconut oil for the oil, the fat of the recipe, and then adding half a cup of cocoa powder, half a cup of oat flour, which if you don't know, oat flour is so easy to make yourself. Literally just blend oats in a blender and you got yourself oat flour. It's way cheaper to make it yourself than what you buy at the store. It's honestly a ripoff if you buy oat flour, so please just don't ever do that if you have a blender. And then I also added half a cup of maple syrup for my sweetener because my mom gave this for us for a gift when she went to Costco. And in Canada here, maple syrup is from here, so it is the elite sweetener. It also is full of minerals and is super healthy for you if you did not know. But you could also add honey, or if you don't have those, sugar is great. It's also cheaper than those. And then I just added a dash of vanilla. I just filled up the cap full for that. And this vanilla was also a gift from my brother's girlfriend, Allie. Thank you. She brought it all the way from Mexico. You don't really need to add vanilla, that's extra. And then a teaspoon of baking soda and just a dash of salt. Mix it all together and then blend it with your black beans and put it in a pan and you're ready to go. It's really that easy. And they are the fudgiest, bestest, I know that's not a word, but I'm going to use it anyway, bestest brownies ever. And for the black bean measurement, I forgot to say, I used 2 cups of black beans. And with all these recipes I'm sharing today, feel free to double them. You can freeze them. These brownies freeze wonderfully. I have frozen them in the past, and that way they will last longer. And as always, grease your pans. I'm using coconut oil again just to keep it with the same theme. But I've learned the hard way multiple times of not greasing my pan and then having it be a sticky mess and not being able to get the brownies out, or they crumble as I try to get them out. You can use parchment paper, but I just try to be as low waste as possible. Some things I feel like it's necessary to use the parchment paper, like the bread recipe, but for things when I can avoid it, I use oil if possible. And when the brownies are all ready to go, you're going to want to pop them into the oven at 350 for roughly 25 minutes, but just keep an eye on them because everyone's oven is different. Next, I started prepping my hummus, and if you watched any of my videos and you know anything about me, I am a big hummus person. I literally eat it probably every day. It's my number one go-to snack because it's so versatile. You can flavor it a bunch of different ways. I make beet hummus, dill pickle hummus, roasted red pepper hummus, garlic hummus, like so many different ways. Normal hummus, like traditional hummus. And then also you can eat it with so many things. You can pair it with the bread I made, the pita chips that I'll be making later, with some veggies, and you can just put it on top of things like soups and stuff like that. So I eat it so much because when you make it yourself, it's actually really cost effective and it's very filling. It's high in protein and fat, which if you are vegetarian or plant-based, that's very important. And because it's high in those two things, it is so filling. A little bit goes a long way. But I do have to be careful because I have no self-control when it comes to hummus. So if you put a whole container in front of me with some pita chips or carrots, I will just eat the whole thing. This is one of the things I feel like most people don't realize how easy it is to make yourself. And because I eat it often, like I said, I make quite a large batch. This amount I make usually lasts me a week, and I like to make it every week because if you let it go any longer, it's still good for, I would say, up to 2 weeks. It just doesn't taste as fresh. So I meal prep this usually on Sunday of every week. I started off with the chickpeas I cooked and added that into a blender. I don't really measure it, but I would say this is roughly 3 cups of cooked chickpeas if I had to guess. And then I added the juice of 1 lemon. You can do 2 with this recipe because it's quite large, but I only had 1. You can also add the lime or lemon extract because that is quite a bit cheaper. I tend to do that sometimes even though I like to use all natural ingredients, but these days lemons and limes at the store have jumped up to $1 per one, just one. So a lot of the times I cannot afford that, so I use the extract. However, this lemon was on sale that Kai grabbed, so we were using a fresh one today, but feel free to use the extract. And then I also added half a cup of tahini, 3 garlic cloves. You can add as much or little as you like depending on how much you like garlic. And a pro tip is to put it in the lemon juice because it helps infuse it, or it helps bring out the flavor of the garlic. 1/4 cup of olive oil, salt to your liking, and then spices of your choice. I use this spice blend I had from Epicure, but you can keep it plain, or like I said, add beet juice or whatever flavoring you want. Blend it up and then store it in a mason jar. Okay, well now we are already on the next recipe, and this is another one where you can kind of just eyeball it and put a little bit of this, a little bit of that. This is one you're probably thinking, Jillian, you live in winter, why are you making popsicles? This is typically one I wouldn't be making in the winter, but my little baby boy Makai is teething, and we are a family that we aren't against medication, but we try to avoid it if possible, so I made him some teething popsicles. This one just had blueberries, peanut butter, homemade oat milk, and bananas for the creaminess. Just froze them in these containers, but I made other ones. If you want the recipe, I can share it with chamomile in it because that has soothing properties and anti-inflammatory properties. But just the coldness of these will help as well. And then I put some into a mason jar with a spoon because I wanted to see if that would work because I'm trying to get rid of plastic slowly. I just drank the rest because I made a huge batch. Once those were put in the freezer, I took out the brownies and granola bars, cut those up, and then next I'm working on my next snack, which is just vegetables. Cut up vegetables. Again, I will eat this with the hummus or by themselves. It's healthy, and I just find when I prep it, I'm way more likely to eat it. I mean, sometimes I'll just eat a carrot as it is, but when they're cut up and ready to go and washed, I'm just more likely to eat it. And the thing about carrots and celery, they're cheap. People have this idea in their head that eating healthy is expensive, but that's kind of my goal on my channel, is to show even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still eat healthy. There's ways around it, and things like carrots and celery are cheap, so we tend to buy them all year around. And another pro tip is you can actually save your veggie scraps and make a veggie stock, which I have a video coming up on that. Some people might not think of this as a snack, but cut up veggies, literally so simple. Peel them, wash them good, especially if they're not organic, and then put them into jars and save them for later. And Makai loves carrots too, and celery. Now on to the next recipe. We are making homemade tortillas, which if you've seen some of my past videos, I have made these before. This is another go-to snack. It is so cheap in replacement of chips and a lot healthier because all you need is flour, salt, and some water and oil, and you don't need a bunch of oil to fry them like the ones you get at the store. Oh, and here I am adding garlic powder for a little bit of a garlic flavor, but this is optional. You can also add any other flavoring or spices that you want. So what I'm doing is I'm making a large batch here. I'm adding 4 cups of water, a little bit of salt, around 1 cup of water, and then half a cup of olive oil, and just mixing it all together with my hands until I form a dough ball, and then rolling them out. Half of them I use for just keep as tortillas, and then the other half I cut up and use as tortilla chips, which, as I mentioned earlier in the video, we love to use this for our hummus because we like to switch it out with our hummus. Sometimes we'll eat it with veggies, sometimes with these chips. And this recipe is very simple and it doesn't take too long, and the chips last if you put them in a Ziploc bag for over a week, actually probably 2 weeks. Fun fact, me and Makai, this was before Makai, this was probably 2020. We went on a huge road trip, and I was just as cheap back then as I am now, except it wasn't as necessary back then as it is now, but that's besides the fact. We made literally bags and bags and bags of these pita chips, probably like 4 or 5 big Ziploc bags. I'll see if I can find the footage. And a huge Tupperware, like a huge Tupperware of hummus, like liters and liters. And I literally just, me and Kai ate that for like 2 weeks and almost nothing else. I mean, we'd buy fresh fruit here and there at markets and some other things, but that was our main thing making us survive during that trip, just to save money. And we mainly just spent money on gas because we also tent it. I just thought that was funny looking back, and I've been making these ever since, so it's been over 5 years now, and I probably make this every week or every other 2 weeks because we use the tortillas all the time. Sometimes for snacks with some peanut butter on it, sometimes for things like quesadillas for dinner or bean burritos. But the chips we eat a lot as a snack with the hummus, or even just by themselves. Some of them I made thinner for the tortillas, and other ones I didn't put the effort into making them as thin because I knew I'd be cutting them up, and when you're cutting them up, it doesn't really matter how thick they are or what shape. And even when you're eating them for tortillas, I'm not always the best at making them perfect, so the shape does not really matter that much, so just do your best. And then when you cook these on the pan, it's optional to add a little bit of oil or not. Usually I just splash a dash of oil for the first one, and that's basically it because I find they don't stick that much really to this frying pan. But as you can see in this footage, I accidentally put a little bit too much, but you can totally skip the oil if you're trying to save money. You're going to want to cook it roughly for a minute or 2 minutes on each side. You'll know when it's time to flip it, and when it's done, when it starts to kind of bubble up, that's when you should flip it. And then if you also want to bake it into pita chips like I am, then you just cut them up into triangles on a cutting board. Again, the size doesn't have to be perfect. Layer them on a baking sheet, turn the oven on to 400. I put it in for roughly 5 minutes, take it out, flip it, and then put it in for another 5 minutes, and then I check them to see how crispy they are. Sometimes I like them more crispy than not, and so then I'll leave it in for another 5 minutes. But it's just one of those things you want to kind of check on and take them out, and then they're ready to enjoy. Definitely store these into a Ziploc bag. I know I try to not use plastic, but it's one of those things when I haven't used plastic or a bag to store them in the past, they went stale. Now on to the next recipe. Although this one isn't necessarily a snack in itself, I use it with a lot of things I eat for snacks. One of the number one things I actually eat for a snack besides the hummus is granola, because I always have a bunch in hand because I always batch prep a big batch of it. And although some people might again think that's not a snack, I eat it like a snack, and I use oat milk with that, and I also use the oat milk in the next recipe, which is chia seed pudding. So for oat milk, you may not realize, but again, it's so easy. All you literally do is blend oats and water and then strain it with an oat milk bag or a muslin cloth. But when you're straining it, make sure to not squeeze it or anything like that, because it will be slimy, and then store it into a mason jar. I just made a smaller batch, so for the measurements, I added 4 cups of water and 1 cup of rolled oats. But you can, again, like any of these recipes, double it. It's just something that I find it's so easy and quick to make that I like to make it fresh every couple of days. And side note, you can save the pulp from the oats from this. I like to freeze it and then use it when I have enough in homemade oatmeal cookie recipes. So now I'm making the chia seed pudding. This, like a lot of my recipes I do, is more like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you can tailor it to your liking rather than following a specific recipe. This time I made it chocolate flavored, but you could add matcha powder or just vanilla or really whatever. But for this recipe that I made, when I measure it, I typically add 4 cups of oat milk, 1/3 cup of cacao powder or cocoa powder, 1/3 cup of maple syrup, a dash of vanilla, and a cup of chia seeds. But again, it's not something that you have to really follow a specific recipe. You can just eyeball it, and I like to make it on the stove because I find it helps mix the ingredients together and mix the cocoa powder, because if not, it doesn't really dissolve in cold milk and it kind of becomes clumpy. And it also helps the chia seeds absorb the liquid faster and kind of set faster than if you don't do this. So that step's optional. I find most recipes don't mention it, but I think it helps a lot, so I take the extra step. And now on to the final recipe of this video, granola. It would not be a snack video if I didn't share this recipe, because it's probably, like I said, besides the hummus, my number one snack. And this is another one that's very customizable. You can add what you want, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, or what you have on hand. You know, use up those cranberries you've had in your cupboard for months and months and months. I have created a recipe in the past, so I'll link the one with the specific measurements if you want to follow it. But here, I'm just adding whatever I have. The most important thing is just getting it wet enough so that it kind of clumps together. You could add a sweetener like maple syrup, or you could add peanut butter or coconut oil, just some sort of liquid. You can make it sweet, you could add no sugar. And then I'm adding a little bit of everything. I have a lot of the stuff on hand for when I make granola, like nuts, dried fruit, but you don't even have to add that. You could make it with just oats and, like I said, either coconut oil, maple syrup, something like that, and that's it. You don't need any of these nuts and seeds. But because I have them, I like to use them. And even though these things are a little more expensive, when my mom goes across, she buys them in bulk at Costco, so it makes it very cost effective. And I just think it's worth the money for me because I love nuts and they are very healthy. And this amount from Costco will last me months and months and months, so it's worth the investment for me. If you see here, I'm first just mixing my oat mixture with the sweetener, the maple syrup, and the coconut oil. And then I cook that because in the past I've added everything before putting it in the oven, but I find the other things kind of just burn. So I add that and bake it around 400 and just keep checking on it and stirring it. That's the thing about granola. It's easy to put together, but you do have to keep an eye on it. And then I add all my seeds and all my goodies into another bowl and then just mix it all together and add the oat mixture to that once it's done. This is great because it takes a little bit of effort up front, not that much, but like a little bit because you are making it. And then it's one of those things that doesn't really go bad or stale, and you can just have it for months and months and months. That's why I'm making such a big batch here, because I like to eat this a lot. And once I have it, it takes like 2 seconds to put it in a bowl with some oat milk and some fruit and some peanut butter, and it's ready to go. And there you have it, snacks we make every single week as a family on a low income. Not only are these snacks healthy, but cost effective. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I love to hear from you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.